And I wanted to ask you, um, how does it make you feel? What is the impact to you personally to write some of these books, and then also have people, give you feedback? Like how it may be changing their perspective.
Well, you learn pretty quickly when you write a book that once you've written the book, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the world, which is a kind of in the beginning, that can be quite painful because you think that it's yours forever. But in the end, if you think about it and you go through the experience more than once, you realize that's kind of beautiful. And that what people do is, if your book works, people take it and they make it their own. And they take the ideas and they adapt them to whatever question they're trying to answer or problem they're facing. And that's actually kind of lovely. Whenever I see that, I feel like I've succeeded at what I'm doing. And it can be a little, sometimes the ways in which people adapt your ideas, they do a little bit of violence to the ideas. But that's okay. That's it's the way the world works.
Are you thinking of a particular book where that happened more prevalently?
Probably Outliers, many people took pieces of Outliers and ran in many different directions with it. It was quite lovely to see, but it didn't always conform with what I thought I was trying to say. But like I said, I very quickly got over whatever discomfort I might have started with.
I think that's really good advice. You create it, you put it out in the world, and then it's sort of this idea of words themselves. The meaning to words are not in the dictionary. The meaning to words are in people. And just depending, if you're a Canadian, you're going to read this differently than if you are an American or from somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of open to our interpretation. So I want to go back to this idea of finding your passion, finding out what you're good at. I am particularly interested in nature versus nurture, this whole sort of argument or debate. Mm-hmm. I can share with you why. I've shared a lot on this channel about my personal thoughts and experience on that. I happen to be adopted. So I think a lot about nature or nurture because I have a certain DNA, but then I've also been brought up in an environment that maybe I've, basically raised by strangers, let's face it, who then, became loving parents and took care of me. But what are your thoughts on nature versus nurture? Were you sort of born to do what you're doing, or was this a learned trait over time? You talk about you're sort of famous. You coined the idea of the 10,000 hour rule, becoming the expert. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my feelings on this, I read, I can't for the life of me remember who wrote it, but I remember reading a paper on this question once, which gave what I think of as the most satisfying answer to the nature-nurture question. And the paper said, it was by a geneticist, I think, who said it depends. It depends on the following thing. If you are poor, then nurture matters a lot. That it really matters what school you go to. It really matters who your parents, like whether your parents have any money. It really matters whether there's books in the home. It really matters all those things. So for poor people, nature is a small thing. Nurture's huge. For rich people, it's the opposite. They're maxed out on nurture. If you upgrade the educational experience of children at the leading private schools in Manhattan, it won't make a whit of difference. They're already at 10, right? For those kids, it's all about your genes. The winners are the ones who have the best set of genes, and the ones who don't make it are the ones who just were born unlucky, right? But viewing, in other words, nature and nurture through a class lens is the most clarifying way to think of it. And I think one of the real issues we have as a country is our failure to understand that. We keep pouring resources, directing resources at people who are maxed out on nurture. And we keep directing resources away from people who would benefit enormously from nurture, which is nuts. It's nuts. The school that should be bare bones is Harvard. Harvard should be run. It should be a bunch of trailers in a park somewhere in Central Florida. Doesn't matter. Those kids, they will win. You could educate them in a closet, and they will be neuroscientists and astrophysicists and run the country. And the school that should be lush is the school that's educating kids on Pell Grants. That's the one where nurture matters. What have we done? The exact opposite, right? One of the many ways in which we are, as a society, are like not just insane sometimes.
I love that observation. When you were describing that, I was imagining Harvard, sort of like that scene from Apollo 13, where they had to take all of the scrap pieces and they threw it on the table and they said, we need to figure out how to save the astronauts. Like, there wasn't a class. They just like put a bunch of stuff in the middle of the room, and there was big brains there so they could figure it out. That's the sort of environment that would be great for a Harvard or a Yale or, wherever. Or the school that has nothing. They need the art program. They need the music program. They need the dance program. They need the football team, the big money. Absolutely.
I mean, I would even say that about myself, that, I don't think I derived any great benefit from the relatively nice education I got in college. I went to, one of Canada's better schools. Didn't make a whit of difference. Really didn't. If you had my father and my mother, you're fine. You're set, right? I mean, I just like done. I mean, I was maxed out on nurture from the minute God decided that Graham Gladwell should be my dad and Joyce Gladwell should be my mom. So it's like it's a very kind of personal observation that I make. An awful lot of money has been squandered on Malcolm Gladwell, right? Enough with squandering money on Malcolm Gladwell. Let's start spending it where it needs to be spent.
So then maybe some advice for parents. What did your parents do really well to help you get on that path? What do you think it is that they did?
Well, my parents were people with very strong moral convictions, deeply religious. That's hugely important to me. They were people of curiosity who thought the world was worthy of exploration and encouraged, by example, me to be curious, took me places, took my brothers places. Whatever, marginal dollars we had as a family were spent on travel, on experiences, not on things. We didn't even have a television. We never ate out. We never, the kind of luxuries you would associate with a middle-class family, we didn't have. But what my dad did do is to make sure that we got on a plane every second year and went somewhere as a family and learned something about another culture so that to me was in retrospect, a brilliant choice. That's the right move. Use your resources to give your child a broad view of the world, and use your energy to give your child a sense of a moral grounding that allows him to interpret the world.
I love that. And so then what advice would you give to young people who are trying to find their passion? There's an idea that you should pursue what you're passionate about. Steve Jobs would say that, you have to be passionate about what you do, otherwise it's never going to scale. You'll eventually burn out. Or the other side of the coin, which is you should pursue what you're great at and then figure out how to love it. Where do you land on either of those?
Oh, well, let's see. The problem is you don't know what you love until you've tried it. You don't know what you're good at until you've tried it. So maybe you should just try a bunch of things. I think people are way too cautious and narrow in their choices early in life. I think people should look at the period from 14 to 30 as just a chance to try as many different things as possible. I mean, one thing I did not do that I really wish I had done is the minute I graduated from college, go to another country. I did. I came to America, but that doesn't count. A real another country. And that was a huge mistake. I don't think and I always counsel people when they're young. It's like, go and experience a totally different culture, because that'll teach you so much about yourself and about others and about how to think and make sense of other experiences. I mean, I guess so you'd answer the question I don't know how to answer, except to say that people should explore first before they decide what their passion is.
Yeah. I can co-sign that international experience. I did that. I did a study abroad in Japan. I was fascinated with Asia and really wanted to learn more about Asian culture and history and religion and all that. And so basically right out of high school, I lived in Japan. It was fabulous. I learned the language. I fell in love with the people, the food, everything. It was one of the best things I've ever done, because it really opened my eyes to just being so ethnocentric, before I left, and then coming back and seeing a whole sort of Eastern philosophy way of seeing things, from medicine to, again, all of it. So it was just incredibly helpful.
Yeah. No, I'm envious. I should have done the same.
What is something that people don't know about Malcolm Gladwell that we might not know about you from reading your books or from listening to the podcast, or what's something that we may not know?
Yeah. I sometimes get this question. I never know how to answer it. Well, of course, because of course, most things about me people don't know, right? So you're asking me to pick the thing out of the long list of things that people don't know about Malcolm. What is the thing that I would choose to share in this moment? Well, let's see. I'm really obsessed with cars. Maybe that's...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I mean,
so what is the obsession, and what kind of cars?
Ever since I was a kid, I never got over the kind of 6-year-old, wow, that's a cool car thing. In fact, it's probably worse today than it was when I was 6. When I used to go, my dad would take me to the Royal Ontario Museum, the big museum in Toronto as a kid, big outing, an hour drive to Toronto, the big city. And he would go in and I would sit on the steps outside all afternoon, because in Toronto I could see cars that I couldn't see in our little town. That was my museum experience. My father spent a lot of time driving me to car dealerships and pretending that he could afford the cars that I wanted to look at. So I can't even explain it. I just, I can talk forever about cars. I spend huge amounts of time reading things on cars. I have, friendships with people that are based 100% on cars. So it's like, I like cars. It's probably...
Again, I think there's this Venn diagram appearing between you and I. Like, there's a lot of overlap.
Are you a car person, right?
Yeah, I love cars too, for some reason.
What do you drive?
Right now, I have a Mercedes, but...
You have to be more specific.
Right
Which
now,
Mercedes?
Right now, I have a poor man's Mercedes. It's the Mercedes C-Class 250 commuter car. It's a very...
What do you mean? I love that car.
And it's a 2013, because I liked the body style.
So do I. I like that. Much sharper edges before it got too softened. Yeah. It's a lovely car.
I love Mercedes, but I've driven some incredible cars, and it's because of some of the work that I've done on the production and commercial side. People have been very generous. So probably, and I want to ask you the same question, but I'll volunteer. The funnest car, the most exciting car I've ever driven is the McLaren 650S.
Okay.
Oh, so amazing. Like, it's like, have you driven a supercar like that before?
I hate to say that I have not driven a supercar. I mean, I've driven a nice car, not a supercar.
So when you get the chance, and I would love to take you for a ride in a McLaren, because I have some connections. And most supercars are like this, I found. But anyway, the McLaren is like, it's like what you would imagine, like first-person experience in a Panther. It's like constantly lurching forward. It doesn't like first gear at all, because, it likes to be at 140 miles an hour. And so actually the most painful thing about driving a McLaren is having to drive the speed limit, because it does not want to go. Like, if you're going 80, it feels like you're going 20. it's so low to the ground and aerodynamic, and it's got the butterfly doors and
Yeah, I had the same. I had a Boxster GTS, beautiful automobile, which I got rid of for that very reason, which was it was always unhappy at the speeds I was driving it. It just doesn't want to drive 60 miles an hour. And you'd think you're driving on a normal pace, and you'd look down, you're going 120 miles an hour. And I was like, you can't do this. It's like you can't drive around upstate New York 120 miles an hour because your car fools you into thinking that it's, so I got rid of it. It's a very sad day.
I just have these dreams of maybe the Autobahn one day. Like I can imagine driving a Porsche that fast on an open road, that's designed for those speeds.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a chance to drive the Lamborghini Urus, which is basically a family car that's
700 horsepower. Yeah. For those periods when you would like to take your family and small children at speeds in excess of 200 miles an hour, that car is perfect.
Well, and it's designed to go off-roading too. Is the funny thing? It's like they show it going through sand and snow and dirt, and I thought, why would I ever want to drive this anywhere where it gets scratched up? But apparently, it's got the suspension and all that to do it. Well, that's interesting. Cars. You're a car guy. I had no idea. Do you like classic cars at all? Or are you more a modern guy? What's your dream car right now, if you could drive one?
Dream car. Kind of have. Well, I have a 2003 BMW M5 E39, which is pretty close to my dream car. And I'm not a vintage guy. Because I don't work on them. So, it gets super problematic when the car gets too old. And but I don't like super, contemporary cars. I think cars I like them when for example, the M5 is it's the last great analog sports sedan. And I'm very fond of the perfected analog era. I'm a manual transmission guy. I don't own a Tesla. Probably won't ever own a Tesla, or maybe someday. Don't never say never.
No, I understand that actually very well, because if you're driving in traffic, manual transmission is not that fun, but otherwise it's the only way to drive because you feel like you're driving. Yeah. My first car was a '69 Volkswagen Beetle.
Nice.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears and talk about Bomber Mafia a little bit. I want to talk about why you wrote the book.
I was waiting for you to come to the Bomber Mafia. It's like the reason for my existence at the moment.
Well, I'm thrilled, and the publisher sent it to me just a couple of days ago, so I'm just diving in. But I sort of know the premise because I'm a fan of Japan. I sort of understand, and I'm interested and intrigued in the the storyline and all that. But talk to me about the book, why you wrote it, who you wrote it for. Is there a metaphor for something else? Like, what's the story?
Well, it was, it's an audiobook that has a print offshoot. So it was written because I did on my podcast a kind of little piece of it and was so enamored and caught up in that world, and particularly in the way that world sounded. And I realized there was a way to tell a war story through audio that would be incredibly powerful. And also because so much of that stuff, because it involves armies keep records. And so you can get just hours and hours of tape of every major figure in the book. This is from 70 odd years ago. I have tape of them talking. I mean, I have hours of tape of them that I could use. So you can bring it all to life. It's this really extraordinary opportunity. And there was something as well about the story. So the story is about a band of kind of renegade pilots in central Alabama in the 1930s who think they can reinvent war. They call themselves the Bomber Mafia. And they think that by taking this newfangled thing called an airplane and figuring out how to drop bombs accurately, they can render conventional armies obsolete. And nobody believes in them. Everyone thinks they're nuts. And the Second World War rolls around just as they are at the height of their philosophizing and theorizing. And they get this opportunity to put their crazy ideas into action. And this book is about what happens. What happens when a group of innovators it's beyond radical. It's sort of hard to describe just what they were pushing in those years. They we use the word disruption now. They were doing more than disrupting war. They were completely reinventing it from the ground up. And the Second World War, and what's weird is this story is so infrequently told about the Second World War. The Second World War is the kind of testing ground for this incredibly radical notion about, can we wage war in a better way, in a more humane way? And they fail. The Bomber Mafia does. And this book is the story of an extraordinary idea and what happened when it confronts reality. And it's the reason, and I wanted to write it because I thought there was something so incredibly contemporary about that notion. Now when we're reinventing everything,
And maybe it's worth noting by comparison, without spoilers, that they basically lost to the Manhattan Project, right?
Yeah, that's one way of thinking about it. They were the competitors. That's right. There were two parallel innovations, technological innovations that were, and it's funny because we only ever talk about the Manhattan Project, but we forget that the Bomber Mafia's project cost more money than the Manhattan Project did. Like way more resources were directed towards the Bomber Mafia than were directed towards, Oppenheimer and all the guys out in the desert. And so these were two ideas that were diametrically opposite ideas about how to fight a war.
One was just like total decimation, civilians, women, children, doesn't matter, animals. The other one was surgical.
Yeah. Was surgical. It was pilots versus physicists, and the physicists won. Setting the stage, by the way, for the second half of the 20th century, which is all about the triumph of the physicists. The physicists won all over the place in the latter half of the 20th century.
So is there a metaphor? What's the takeaway message beyond the completely compelling, thrilling, interesting storyline? Is there a higher takeaway? Is there a metaphor?
Yeah, there's a number, and every time I think about the book, I come up with a different takeaway. One of them most certainly is how much we need dreamers. That these guys are dreamers, the Bomber Mafia. They are, the man, I spent a lot of time on a guy named Haywood Hansel, who is the kind of romantic at the heart of the Bomber Mafia, the kind of de facto leader of the group. And Haywood Hansel is a romantic. He really is. He's someone who has this kind of, his favorite book is Don Quixote. He thinks of himself as the knight tilting at windmills. He knows that the odds of him pulling off this grandiose reimagining of war are slender, and he tries it anyway. And he tries it in Europe and it fails, and he keeps trying it. And he goes to Japan and fails and wants to keep trying. And when they finally get rid of him, he can't believe he's been sacked. And I realize I love this man, and I want more of him in the world. Just people who he had a passion for that was fueled by a moral notion. The moral notion was he had observed the First World War and had seen the devastating carnage, and he said, we can't do that again. And he said, I think I can solve that problem technologically. And people who want to use technology for moral ends are, to my mind, heroes. And people who use technology without considering moral ends are, to my mind, villains. And Hansel's a hero, but he also, his career ends in disgrace. I mean, he's forgotten by history. This is the story I tell in this book is largely untold. It's sort of odd. All of these guys and their passion have kind of dropped out of sight. And what do we have? We have shelves and shelves of books about the atomic bomb and almost nothing on the idea that was trying to confront it.
So it seems like, to me, all of your books are basically this holding up a mirror to society, or holding up a mirror to us, the reader, hoping that we'll see our reflection, or maybe the reflection of someone we know, someone we don't want to be, or someone who we want to be. Is the message in Bomber Mafia about this failure, that it's not about the result, it's about the effort, it's about the mindset, like the willingness to try, to have the courage? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of this book is about the importance of failure. Failure, I mean, I was attracted to the story because for me, failure is always more interesting than success, if you're a storyteller. I remember once I spent a year tracking a guy who ran a biotech company who was trying to come up with a new treatment for melanoma, one of the hardest of all cancers to treat. And their phase 1 trials were incredibly promising. And he had this little company in Boston, and he thought he'd cracked this thing that no one else had cracked. So I followed him for a year through all phase 2, phase 3, right up to the point where they got the decision from the FDA, and I was there when the FDA said it doesn't work. And I wrote the piece, and I remember somebody writing a commentary on his piece, it was for the New Yorker, and saying, boy, Gladwell blew it. He thought he was going to get this story about how they beat melanoma, and he didn't. And I was like, it's 100% wrong. You missed the point. The point is that both those stories are powerful. It would have been for different reasons. If you have melanoma, the great story is, or if you're a human being who cares about the world, the great story is that the drug works. If you're thinking about a powerful emotional story that you can draw lessons from, the great story is it didn't work in the end. And a group of people poured their heart and soul into something, and for 5 years, and it all ended up in tears. But in so doing, because they failed, they have clarified the problem for the next person who comes along, right? We never talk about how failure is a contribution to our knowledge, right? It's to say that something doesn't work is, in the end of the day, as useful as saying something does work, because it points you in the right direction. You don't get to where you want to go unless a bunch of people fail before you. And so that's why you can't brush aside the failures and say that they wasted their time. They didn't waste their time.
Yeah, you're right. It's worth reflecting on, all of this, right? It's we're building it brick by brick. We're standing on the shoulders of the great ones. You look at, I don't know anything about astrophysics or that discipline, but Sir Isaac Newton, got us to a certain point, and then Einstein took it the rest of the way. And I was talking with Neil deGrasse Tyson about this. He said Einstein couldn't have done what he did, the theory of relativity and all of that, without the base foundation work of Sir Isaac Newton. Even though some would say that Einstein proved Newton wrong. No, he got us to as far as he could get us based on the time period in which he lived, and then Einstein brought it home. And so that also gives us hope for the future as we look down the stream. It's like what we're doing now matters. Mm-hmm. So let's stay on that theme for just a second.
Well, I was going to say on that theme, that's exactly what the Bomber Mafia do, is they clarify for the next generation what the aim of modern warfare should be. So that if you think about what war looks like today, war today is obsessed with the idea of precision, right? That all of these technologies, radar, drones, they're all GPS, are all about using what used to be weapons of mass destruction and making them methods of precision and discretion. Satellites, endlessly. I remember when I was reporting this book, hanging around with these Air Force generals, and they desperately wanted me to talk to this guy who's the kind of, not the father of GPS, but the guy who takes GPS, the concept, and makes it real for the Air Force and he's like no one's ever heard of him. He's off in the middle of nowhere. And they were so obsessed with this guy, correctly. They were like, that guy created our world. GPS is what the Air Force is about, right? It is about landing the bomb exactly where you want to land it so that you don't kill someone who's innocent. And that idea that should be what the Air Force is about begins in the 1930s with a bunch of guys, the Bomber Mafia, who failed, spectacularly failed, right? The book is about, the Bomber Mafia ends with the story of a failure, their failure, which was, the result of their failure was one of the deadliest nights of war in the history of mankind. I mean, so it's like, it's not garden variety failure. These are people who were haunted for the rest of their life about what they couldn't accomplish. And yet, in the end, we're better off because of that.
So if failure is an option, it is necessary to get to success or get to the objective. How should we be measuring our own success? Let's bring it back to the everyday person who's got, let's call them an entrepreneur, and she's running her business and she's disappointed because she doesn't have the metrics or the optics or the revenue. How should we be measuring success when it feels like all we're doing is failing?
Yeah. Well, maybe we need to expand our definitions of success. So, one definition of success is my company makes money and, and grows and et cetera, et cetera. But that's never going to be possible for every entrant, is it? It's not the way a market economy works. And what we've been saying over the last 5 minutes is there have to be failures in order for successes to happen. The iPhone required the Palm Pilot to, go belly up for it to work, right? Pave the way. I mean, we can come up with a million examples. So maybe what we should do, in Outliers, I had this definition of success. Success was if you were able to do autonomous work, so to be in control of the work you do. If your work is difficult, and that is that it engages your mind. It's not rote. And third, that there is a relationship between effort and reward, that if you work harder and try harder, you get something back. Now, that could be money, but it could be also something else, satisfaction, congratulation, recognition. It just has to be, and when work meets those three criterion, that is, you are a success. And you can have a company that goes belly up and consider yourself by those three criterion to be successful.
Maybe as we round third, bring it home, do you have a process? So what is your process as you're looking at different projects? And forgive me if I don't know, but have you ever considered taking any of these books, or maybe Bomber Mafia, and turning it into like a Ken Burns style documentary film, like a full-length film?
Well, no, I hate video. I just hate, once you have a camera, once you want to record then you need a crew, and then you need 10 times as much money, and then the whole process takes 5 years as opposed to 1 year, and then you have the headache of how to distribute it, and on and on and on and on and on. I got no time for that. And you got to do 7 takes, and then they're adjusting your makeup, and then it's like...
Michael Crichton wrote this book that became a decently successful franchise, or Tom Clancy, any of these. I mean, they basically they just wrote the screenplay. Couldn't you just be the screenwriter?
You know how hard it is to be my best friend is a screenwriter. He will remind me every day. You can't waltz in and be a screenwriter. It's like saying I should just try neurosurgery. Do you think Mount Sinai will let me try neurosurgery? No, they won't.
I mean, I'm just thinking of a book like Bomber Mafia. It just sounds, I can already kind of see the movie in my...
Oh, someone should do it. Just not me. I don't want any part of it. But if somebody wants to come along and, write me a big check and go off and make a movie out of the Bomber Mafia, be my guest. I would be delighted.
Maybe that person's me. We'll see. I mean, I know a few people here in Hollywood.
Brian, you are more than welcome to it. You are. I'll give you a special deal.
Who would play the lead? Who would play
our dreamy Haywood Hansel?
Who would play that? Is that Matt Damon?
No, Matt Damon is too is to actually Matt Damon. I'll give you Matt Damon. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, a certain savoir-faire about him. Yes.
And who would play the villain?
Curtis LeMay.
Mm-hmm.
Curtis LeMay is a young Jack Nicholson.
So that's Leo DiCaprio.
No, Leo DiCaprio is too handsome and too. Curtis LeMay is a kind of tough guy. He's hard bitten. In the day, this dates me. Charles Bronson would play him. You know, muttering, man, a few words, kind of has a kind of physicality to him. Leo DiCaprio doesn't have the kind of necessary physicality. He's too cerebral for that. Curtis LeMay was like a hands-on pilot. He's like one of the great pilots of his generation. He was famous for like fixing B-29 bombers himself. Like, that's not Leo DiCaprio, right? That's someone else. So yeah. But there's something in that kind of early Jack Nicholson mode.
What does the process look like for you when you choose a project? You sort of seems like you find a thread of a story, you start pulling at it, and maybe you discover something that no one else has considered, or you see something that no one else can see, and you feel like you want to tell that story. But how long does it take you to write a book like Bomber Mafia? Is this a 5-year project in the making? Would it happen in 6 weeks or?
I mean, I did it in the calendar year 2020. So I started because I did a couple of podcast episodes based on it, and those were reported in early part of last year. And then I finished my reporting in the fall, and I wrote it in the fall, I guess in the beginning of, finished and recorded it. We produced it. We've been producing it since in last 2 months. So there's a lot of tape. I mean, when you're doing audiobooks, this is really an audiobook, as I've said. Audiobooks are a little less time consuming because you're relying on tape. And, so that a lot of your narrative can be carried in someone else's voice. So it's not like you have to write everything yourself.
Yeah, in the Revisionist podcast, it seemed like it was maybe 5 parts.
3 parts. Yeah, so I turned 3 parts into essentially 7 parts. That was the trick, yeah.
I guess I'm thinking about that, or speaking to current or prospective authors who are thinking about turning an idea like that into a book. The critic might say that there's a lot of filler in there because you've got the transcripts or the actual history did most of the work for you, but I doubt that is the case. I think you really have to probably be quite a historian, researcher to sift through what I would imagine like a Costco-size warehouse of.
Yeah, I have a lot of books on bombing. But you're really curating a lot of it. It's different from writing a book, so you go to the archives of the Air Force University and you go through they have reels and reels and reels of tape, and you decide whose voice you want to represent in the book. And that's the decision you're making as the author. You're not writing. They're telling their story for you. You're maybe writing around it and setting it up, but it's really about whose story do you want to tell. It's a very different question. It's one of the reasons why doing audio is so interesting to me, because it is a very different process than writing a book, a conventional book.
And it seems like you do you are the David in all of your stories. You're the underdog. Is that a true statement? And if so, why do you sort of write the underdog story, or the story that's never really told? Why is that a thing?
Well, why would I write a book about a subject that people already know about? That's why I'm always I'm always in awe of people who write about politics, because you're writing about a subject that we're all such fanatic observers of politics. If you're the person writing the 700th article on Donald Trump, how do you do that? I don't know how you would do that. I mean, can you possibly say anything new about that man at this point? So I prefer green fields. to plowed fields.
The reason I love it is because I fancy myself as an underdog. I always have. Even when I'm succeeding, I still feel like the underdog. But I also think that representation matters. So when you write about marginalized people or communities or ethnicities or genders, I think representation is important for people to see them as heroes overcoming adversities, not just the Luke Skywalker, archetype type of guy. I think, again, looking at your body of work, for the most part, it seems like that's also a thread. You like to talk about people who don't get the spotlight much and deserve it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, no, that's a shine a light in an unusual direction.
Yeah. Okay, so final parting words maybe for fans of Malcolm Gladwell, fans of your books, something you'd like to tell people, and maybe just some parting words.
Well, I would encourage everyone to listen to my upcoming season of Revisionist History, which I'm very proud of. It's in the works right now. We're about halfway there. I have a 3-part series on The Little Mermaid and what's wrong with it. So you have watched The Little Mermaid.
Oh, yes, of course.
So you are my target audience, and I would urge you to listen and then take the appropriate steps.
Okay. That sounds like a challenge. I love it.
Yes, that is my parting advice to everyone out there. The Little Mermaid. Listen up. Season 6, Revisionist History.
I love it.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. It's all about the journey. Ain't nothing changed but the weather. The dangling carrot that hang from the rear view. Your dreams in the past ain't nowhere near you. Backseat drivers got nothing but 2 cents. Shotgun riders too biased, they all liars. I should get an A for effort, I'm too tired. But I'm never giving up, that's why I'm kinda admired. Role model, like it or not, I gotta play it. Sugarcoat the rhyme sometimes, but still say it. Said I was quitting at 40 is just a fib. I'm still a kid that's wiping the food off of my bib. You ever wanted something so bad that you could taste it? Cried over every opportunity wasted. Good and bad news, which one you want first? Either way you pick, the bad still gon' hurt you the worst. I never got to bask in the fruits of the labor, and I never got the cash from that dude from the label. I'm just thinking back.